For millennia, deep-sea species, which were sometimes brought up in our nets or found stranded on the surface, have fueled our imaginations. Through strange visions, we've projected our fantasies and fears into the great depths, where we imagined, lurking in the abyss, the existence of legendary creatures from 20,000 leagues under the sea. Today, fictional sea creatures like mermaids, kraken, leviathans, and sea serpents have been joined in the abyss by a reality that has caught up with our imaginations. Our myths and fairy tales have turned into fairy tales, because by venturing where the sun never goes down, we have discovered, over the last few decades, that the deeper we go into the great depths, the more often the creatures we encounter are of enormous size. There exist, buried under sometimes several thousands of meters of black water, true giants who, unlike the mythological creatures that populate our imaginations, are very much alive. They take the form of disproportionate spiders, gigantic red or black jellyfish, enormous cephalopods, or even crustaceans of excessive size. In the abyssal depths, encountering colossal beings is not uncommon, which can seem very strange when you think about it. Logically, it should even be the opposite. Let me explain to you. It is estimated that 1 to 5% of all food produced by the activity of living beings, which in the top layers of the ocean carry out photosynthesis, ends up reaching the deep ocean floor, which really isn't a lot. This resource is the sole energy input on the ocean floor. In other words, in the abyss, one must directly or indirectly make do with what deigns to fall down here. And the little food available in this hostile, cold, dark, and pressurized environment means that one would expect to find only tiny creatures and in small quantities. Which is partly true, because almost all species that are already small in size near the surface see the dimensions of their deep-sea cousins further decrease as one goes deeper. Except that alongside all these dwarfs, there are also giants, animals whose sizes continue to grow as we go deeper. This remarkable tendency of deep-sea creatures to reach extraordinary sizes, far surpassing those of their counterparts, from shallow waters is commonly referred to as deep-sea gigantism or abyssal gigantism. But before we try to explain how and why such imposing creatures can exist, I would like to take you on a quick tour of the bestiary of giants, from the depths, whose waist size seems to have lost all sense of proportion. Many deep-sea crustaceans can reach sizes that would make you grimace on Earth. But the most impressive is, undoubtedly, the giant isopod Batinomus giganteus. Because if the distant cousins of this species evolving in surface waters are only a few centimeters at most, in the abyss, these isopods easily exceed half a meter in length for the weight of a small dog. In other words, it is not uncommon to encounter, under several kilometers of black water, depigmented crustaceans that are true visions of nightmares. This variety of amphipod crustaceans was observed at 50 miles deep, gorging themselves. The corpses of fish that have been lowered into an abyssal trench to bait and study them, they often exceed 30 centimeters in length. In this orgy of gigantism, the king crabs are not to be outdone. Those said to be colossal, which you see passing near an autonomous rover, doing some handling by, 2,644 meters deep precisely, have legs with a span reaching nearly 70 centimeters. Without any other scale to figure out the size of what we observe than the lasers used by the rovers, it is often difficult to instantly grasp the enormity of some creatures we come across. Thus, this red jellyfish discovered by the teams of the Mbari Institute, evolving at nearly 2,000 meters deep, is named Tiburonia and is immense. With its umbrella of nearly 3/4 of a meter, it is one of the largest jellyfish on our planet. As for this fascinating species of ghostly-looking black jellyfish, it too was immortalized by one of the Mbari Institute's submarines at nearly 1,000 meters deep. With its umbrella of nearly 3/4 of a meter, it is one of the largest known jellyfish. Is this seven-armed octopus one of the largest known species of octopuses to date? And it likely spends its entire adult existence drifting around 1,000 meters deep. Nearing 4 meters in length, it weighs an estimated 75 kilos. It has only been observed 3 times over the last 30 years by the teams at the Mbari Institute. And among the giants of the deep, there are also a number of squid species, such as the very rarely observed colossal squid, a 1,543 pounds mastodon over 16 yards long, and who, not content with being the largest invertebrate on the planet, also has the largest eyes in the animal kingdom. Although they are less impressive in size than giant or colossal squids, other deep-sea cephalopods, such as Humboldt squids, or even certain species of transparent squids such as the astonishing cockatoos, often exceed by several meters the dimensions of their very distant cousins evolving in surface waters. Sometimes, certain giant species evolving in the abyss, such as the large fin squid Maniopina, have no equivalent on the surface. When we capture on image this strange creature drifting near the bottom without having a visual reference without scale, we struggle to grasp its extraordinary dimension. Consider that this squid, here surprised at about 4,000 meters deep, has 8-meter-long tentacles that it lets drift below its head, like a fishing net in search of zooplankton. As for this strange ethereal creature that you are observing and whose body looks like a giant spaghetti, it's coiled in a spiral. It's a giant siphonophore which, once uncoiled, probably approaches 50 meters. So much so that this organism is twice as long as it is. A blue whale has such a phenomenal size that it can claim the title of the largest animal in the world. And in the middle of this family photo grouping, the most emblematic of the giants, we even find some vertebrates, such as eels, sharks or rays, including stingrays, evolving at more than 300 meters deep, usually approaching 3 meters long for a 30-meter wingspan. In short, we could continue the list for a long time. So how to explain this overabundance of gigantism? Why? Among the thousands of known isopod species around the world, the most imposing one is precisely the one evolving at great depths. In a cold, dark environment where food is extremely scarce and the pressure is staggering. Let's start by debunking a misconception. Although the pressure in the abyss seems terrifying to us, it is not really a problem for those who endure it and have managed to adapt. The deepest fish that have been discovered, for example, the snailfish, have been spotted up to great depths, around 8,300 meters, where the water pressure is nearly 830 times greater than that at the surface. If the fact that as you go deeper, every additional 10 meters of water above you, it's the total weight of the entire atmosphere that is added. In terms of pressure on your shoulders, it's not a problem for these fish, and more generally, for all those who evolve here. It's because all these living organisms are mostly made up of water, an incompressible liquid. In fact, evolving in a liquid is even an advantage, a facilitator to reach imposing sizes. Because whether you are close to the surface or at great depths, if you are massive to be submerged in water, you only partially need to carry your huge carcass. Archimedes' thrust takes care of compensating for you as a counterbalance to the force of gravity. And as long as you have neutral buoyancy, you have little effort to make to move around. And now it is possible to reach dimensions in water that are simply unthinkable on dry land. Okay, so buoyancy highlights how the inhabitants of the deep manage to, let's say, not collapse under their own weight. In fact, a half-meter isopod couldn't survive for long on land. But this doesn't tell us at all why having a large size in the abyss seems to be an advantage. What drives such a large number of organisms to become so huge in an environment where there is so little to eat? This question has long been posed by scientists, and in an attempt to answer it, many leads and explanations, sometimes competing, have been explored. Some of them squabbling, like two abyssal species fighting for their survival by trying to seize a meager booty. And as we are probably not yet arrived today, managed to decide on the why of the how. I'll present the most plausible explanations in no particular order. Already and in a way, absolutely counterintuitive, the glaring lack of resources that prevail in the deep could favor gigantic organisms. The idea is as follows. The more massive you are, the more you are able to build up reserves to store large amounts of energy when the opportunity to gorge exceptionally presents itself. Consider that the giant isopods and amphipods of the abyss, not content with being scavengers capable of feeding on almost anything and everything, are able to swallow in a few hours as much as their own weight, and thus be able to survive for very long periods without eating. In captivity, after letting them feed to their heart's content, individuals have been observed to fast for several months, and therefore only living on the reserves they had managed to build up. Another example, the impressive Greenland sharks, which evolve at more than 2,000 meters deep in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, and can reach nearly 7 meters. For a mass of 1.5 tons, they also seem to have mastered the art of storing energy. Indeed, it is thought that the largest of them can put several hundred kilos of food at a time in their gigantic stomach, food that they convert into fat that can be mobilized over long periods of time to allow them to travel great distances over the deep sea. An undeniable advantage when we know that, in these starving depths, it is often several months of famine that pass between two meals, and that the most interesting of them are the fall of whale carcasses or other imposing animals living in the upper water layers and who, when they die, most of the time end up sinking to the bottom of the ocean. From then on, the sharks that acquired these treasures will gorge themselves until nearly overflowing, and thus have enough energy and reserve to be able to wait and then reach the life-saving carcass of a new death, which they will be able to detect arriving at the bottom of the ocean, thanks to their particularly developed sense of smell, which allows them from a great distance to identify the presence of large quantities of decomposing organic matter. Similarly, deep-sea giant crustaceans possess antennas that enable them to detect the scent of decaying corpses, and thus traverse the great depths in search of fish carcasses. And when the opportunity to eat presents itself, these crustaceans ingest as much flesh as possible, so much so that when we lower baits into the abyss in order to attract these immense crustaceans, to study them, it often only takes a few hours before all the flesh disappears, carried away by these hungry scavengers. And then, having a large body is also an effective way to conserve energy, because the more massive you are, the smaller the ratio between the surface area of the body and its volume. In other words, the bigger you are, the less proportion of our body is in contact with the outside environment, which means that, all things being equal, you need to expend less energy to maintain your heat. This is called Kleiber's law. And that's why a fish that's 100 times heavier than another only consumes on average about 30 times more energy. When you consider that, in the deep ocean, the water temperature is close to the freezing point, you can immediately see the advantage of gaining a lot of mass when you can. In addition to this, larger animals also have slower metabolisms than smaller ones, and this significantly slowed down operation extends their lifespan. Thus, the age of an accidentally caught Greenland shark was estimated to be nearly 400 years old. So the giants of the abyss generally live longer, and from this longevity comes an additional explanation to Kleiber's law. Many of the species we have talked about seem to grow slowly and continuously throughout their existence. However, in the sparse environments where these giants evolve, encountering potential predators is already a small event in itself. And once they reach adulthood, the risks of coming face to face with a creature that has enough energy to attack you without being certain of the outcome are extremely rare. For example, giant and colossal squids have, all in all, only one known predator on the entire planet, the sperm whale. Thus, it is said that the predation pressure here is very low, and the oldest individuals therefore reach considerable sizes. The problem is that Kleiber's law does not explain why. In places, in the great depths, we find gigantic carnivorous sponges. These animals that look like plants, which remain rooted to the ground all their lives, feeding. Organic particles continuously drifting in the current have no need to store energy to cover great distances. And yet, we know of sponges as big as a small van. This one, immortalized by the NOAA teams, is precisely 2,134 m deep off Hawaii, is 3.50 m long and over 2 m high, without us really knowing what advantage it gets from it. To Kleiber's laws are added those known as Bergman's, which propose to explain abyssal gigantism by other factors. Indeed, it has been noticed that in general, almost all marine animals tend to increase in size as the temperature of their environment decreases. And within the same group, the largest species are most often found in the coldest environments, while the smallest evolve in the warmest regions. For instance, penguins residing in the relatively temperate Galapagos Islands weigh about 2 kg, while those from southern Argentina, which evolve in a colder region, display some 5 kilograms on the scale. And the species that have adapted to the extremely cold conditions of Antarctica regularly exceed 40 kilos. And this explanation is consistent with abyssal gigantism, given that, in practically all the oceans of the globe, past a few hundred meters deep, the temperature stabilizes around 4 degrees. In the polar regions, where surface waters can reach temperatures that are found elsewhere in the world only at great depths, we even observe forms of gigantism just a few meters below the foam of the waves. Indeed, in the shallow depths of the Arctic and Antarctic oceans, many animals, such as sponges or crinoids, are larger than their counterparts, evolving at the same depths, a few thousand kilometers away in warm waters. Thus, while the sea spiders that one can encounter in polar regions can easily reach half a meter in width, elsewhere in the world, at equivalent depths, the same species will be practically imperceptible to the naked eye. And I must slip this in here just like that these sea spiders have such a small trunk that some of their organs extend into their legs. You can do with that information what you will. Now take a deep breath, because, alongside temperature, the levels of oxygen available in the water are probably also at the heart of the explanation for the emergence of these titans. Indeed, for an equivalent volume, cold waters are almost always richer in dissolved oxygen than warm waters. Within the latter, molecular speed allows oxygen to escape more easily. Icy waters allow much larger organisms to be oxygenated. Thus, in polar waters, the largest animals are in a way doubly advantaged, because their slower metabolism means they need less oxygen per unit of mass than smaller organisms, while at the same time, it is easier for them to access it. Well, at very great depths, it's a bit different, because the pressure adds its influence to the icy waters. And the available oxygen levels also depend on the conditions that prevailed on the surface before these waters plunged. But generally, the logic is consistent. Abyssal gigantism would be an adaptation to take advantage of the low oxygen levels available in these hostile and cold regions. What's quite sad about this story is that if the temperature-oxygen hypothesis is correct, or let's say part of the explanation, then the giants of the polar regions, and to a lesser extent those of the great depths, could quickly decline. Because with the warming of surface waters and the melting of ice in the polar regions, the available oxygen levels in the sea are likely to plummet. And the living beings of imposing dimensions ended up disappearing. In addition to Kleber's and Bergmann's laws, there is also the fact that all these abnormally large animals, whether they evolve near the surface, in the polar regions, or in the abysses, are all practically isolated from the rest of the world. Just like those living on an island several thousand kilometers away from the continents, in Antarctica, for example, the species that have adapted to the very particular conditions prevailing on the continental shelf are in a way isolated for millions of years from their open sea counterparts by the powerful circumpolar current that encloses and belts the sixth continent, making it extremely difficult to access for marine animals that are not adapted to it. And this isolation could, over time, have in a way redistributed the available cards, creating new power relations, new balances. Polar regions, like those of the abyss, would have, somewhat apart from the world, favoured the emergence of specialised species. And, among the great variety of traits that increase chances of survival, the one of having an enormous size would have prospered. Unlike isolated islands where animals generally end up decreasing in size over time due to limited territorial resources. Those evolving in polar waters, as in the abyss, are free to travel great distances to find food in a universe totally devoid of borders. And with that, I think we need to open a tiny parenthesis to prevent, after this episode, your minds, soaked by the sight of all these giants of the abyss, from coming to represent themselves, all creatures lurking in the great depths, as gigantic. Always keep in mind that most inhabitants of the deep sea do not exceed a few centimeters in length. The photogenic black devils are often seen between 1,000 and 40 miles, and who, with their ink-black skin and luminous lure screwed between their two eyes, have practically become synonymous with monsters. From the great depths, as they have been shown in reports on the Abyss, are, for example, relatively modest in size, rarely exceeding 20 centimeters. In fact, and even if some species of anglerfish are close to 2 meters long, most are small in size. The specimen you currently see fleeing from the lights of one of the Mbari Institute's autonomous rovers is barely larger than a kitten. In short, whether small or large, all animals evolving at great depths have this superiority over those living in our myths that they really exist. These animals are present there now, in our oceans, and constitute treasures as precious as pirate chests filled to the brim with gold coins. All these species, whether small or giant, monstrous or endearing, are an invitation to marvel and dream. Awake in front of so many mysteries and beauty. How many legendary creatures owe their existence in our myths to incredible encounters, which, distorted and amplified over time, ended up giving birth to imaginary supernatural beings, to 20,000 gods under the seas. How can we not imagine that the adventure stories of sailors or fishermen who encountered the impressive oarfish are the origin of the myths of the great sea serpent? As impressive as it is, the longest bony fish in the world, which can reach nearly 12 meters for a weight of 300 kg, is still shrouded in mysteries today. Despite modern exploration methods and the increasing number of people who dive with GoPro cameras each year, sightings of this creature in the wild remain extremely rare. In this video, captured by a rover from the University of Louisiana in the Gulf of Mexico, we were exceptionally able to observe one in the deep ocean. But while the oarfish spends its entire life in the open sea, between 100 and 1,000 meters deep, almost all of the specimens observed alive were near the
surface, presumably
forced to go back up against their will by the force of a poorly managed current, or after getting lost because they were sick, or having been injured. Godzilla, Cthulhu, or the Leviathans. All these giant monsters reflect like so many mirrors the fears and fantasies that we have throughout history associated with these immense expanses of black water. And this bestiary of monsters that yesterday populated our nightmares has been gradually replaced by unexpected discoveries of creatures that, I hope, make you dream. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it and subscribing. You can also support me on Typee and find content inversely proportional in length to the lifespan of a Greenland shark on my Instagram. This episode, rich in significant waistlines, could not have been made without the support of the City of the Ocean and the Biarritz Aquarium. If you're in the south of France, visit the City of the Ocean and the Biarritz Aquarium. It's a guarantee of spending a moment in a bubble, away from the world of earthlings, having privileged access to underwater mysteries. At the aquarium, you can observe up close many of the fascinating inhabitants of the underwater worlds. On the other side of the glass of one of the largest tanks in France, you can let yourself be lulled by the enchanting grace of about 10 different species of sharks, like those in other tanks, of jellyfish with undulating umbrellas. At the City of the Ocean, you will discover a wealth of fun and intelligent content about the ocean. In this amazing place, thanks to interactive and immersive experiences, 3D animation simulators, you can listen, touch, feel the big and small stories of the ocean. And this, from the tropics to the poles of the surface, from the waves to the great abyssal depths where the sunlight never descends.